This is the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Welcome back. I'm Jackson Neill. It is Friday, November 27th, 2019, back here on the podcast talking about Jim Harbaugh and the University of Michigan football team. Why I think his time there is not done yet. He can still save it, but I'll explain why. But before we jump into that, I want to remind everyone to rate and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platforms. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So make sure to subscribe, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, SoundCloud, all of those places you can find this podcast as well as my other ones. So last week, the University of Michigan had its first defeat of the season, and it was a really, really ugly one. The 35-14 loss to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and it really wasn't even that close. And it kind of confirmed what a lot of people were suspecting of Michigan, that they weren't really a real and true contender this season. The first week, they gave up 21 points to Middle Tennessee. I know they won 40-21, but still giving up 21 points was a little bit of a red flag for people, but you figure first week, maybe just some jitters. Then they host Army in the second week, and they win, but just barely, 24-21 in double overtime. And if we're being honest, Army should have been able to win that one at the end of regulation. The Wolverines were lucky that they survived at home against that Army team. And I know Army's good, but it's still not a game that you would expect Michigan to be struggling with. Then, last week, opening conference play, that terrible, terrible loss to Wisconsin. So basically, last week was kind of the confirmation for a lot of people that that Michigan is just not that good this season, and that they're not really as much of a contender as we expected them to. And that's saying something, because coming into this season, Michigan was expected to be arguably the best team in the Big Ten. Now, I know Ohio State was ranked higher, but I saw some pretty big experts picking Michigan to go past Ohio State finally. And the big narrative following this Wisconsin loss was that Jim Harbaugh's time is over with the Wolverines. The writing has kind of been on the wall for a while now, some people were saying, and that this loss cements it. And when you look at the numbers and you look at his career so far at Michigan, you have to say it's disappointing that his overall record is 40-15 now in his fifth season. So that's averaging a couple wins a year, which for the most part, that's not that bad in college football, except when you're at Michigan, a place where you're expected to have a lot better than just a couple losses per year. You're expected to go undefeated. You're expected to be competing for national championships. Speaking of national championships, they're 1-3 in bowl games. That one win, that was in the Citrus Bowl in his first season there. So since his first season, when he kind of had that big turnaround right after Brady Hoke, they haven't done anything in the postseason. And obviously, that means they have never made the college football playoff, a big fact that is really, really troubling for a lot at Michigan, because look at Jim Harbaugh's price tag. He's getting paid around $7.5 million per year. He's one of the top 5, top 3 highest paid college football coaches. So to be paid like a national title contender, not to be even making a college football playoff, let alone win a national title or make it to the national title game, it's a big problem. And a lot of it you can kind of stem going back, obviously, to that record with those several losses this season. But really, there's one stat that is the nail in the coffin when it comes to Jim Harbaugh's time at Michigan, and the thing that kind of put him on the hot seat coming into this season and kind of made everybody think, maybe this would be his final year in Ann Arbor. And that's the 0-4 record against Ohio State. That in the biggest game of the year, arguably the biggest game of each college football season, or pretty consistently is the biggest game of each college football season, he has not produced. He has not been able to make things, to get a win. And not only has he lost, but they've been bad losses. Like really, really bad. Only one of those games was it a single-digit loss. Other times, it's by several touchdowns, 42-13, 62-39, just games where Even if his offense produces, puts up the 39 points, they give up over 60. It's just not it just hasn't worked that well for Jim Harbaugh going up against Ohio State. It's just been a complete lack of results. And when you're at the head coach of one of these big universities, think of Alabama, think of Auburn, LSU, Michigan, Ohio State. A lot of times it comes down to these rivalry matchups that you can be really successful at Auburn, but if you're losing to Alabama every year, you're not going to last very long. You can be doing great at Clemson, but if you're always finishing the season with one loss and that one loss is to South Carolina, you're not going to be remembered as a great head coach. And with the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, arguably the biggest in college football, for a coach on either side, whether it's the Ohio State coach or the Michigan coach, a huge chunk of their legacy, maybe even more than their overall record, is that record against that rival. Is that, were you able to get it done in the biggest game of the year? Because even if Michigan plays for a national title game, to a lot of their fans, to a lot of the supporters of that school, the Ohio State game is usually the biggest one of the season, every single year. And to have 4 chances and to lose each and every single time, that's just unacceptable. That's just a complete mark against Harbaugh. However, even as you make this case against why Jim Harbaugh should not be at Michigan anymore, I mean, he's had this complete lack of results, and if we're being honest, it's not even because he has a lack of talent. During his 4 years there prior, he's had 3 top 10 recruiting classes as ranked by ESPN, so he's obviously getting the talent in there. It's just coming down to, is he developing and is he coaching them and putting them in the position to compete for the national title like they should be doing with that kind of talent? So as you look at all of that, and you look at this disappointment, that 0-4 record, and that all makes you want to say that right after this Wisconsin loss, that he's done, that he can't bounce back from that it is the writing on the wall, he is done as Michigan's head coach. However, that's simply not the case. That every year there's always this kind of storyline that happens in September, maybe early October, that we end up looking back on, and we just can't believe that was an actual storyline, that actually was something considered as being serious. A couple years ago, I remember James Franklin, they started out pretty rough. Penn State did. And there was calls for his head because I think it was about his 3rd season. And before you know it, they win the rest of their games and they almost make the college football playoff, and the complete narrative around Penn State flips. That now James Franklin had an incredible season, whereas just a couple months prior, people were saying that he was not going to last out the rest of the year in Happy Valley. So this is this year's story for that, or it has the potential to be. Because right now Michigan sits at 2-1 and with a conference loss to Wisconsin. But you have to look at that conference loss and say it's not as bad as it could be. Even though it's a big score and all, it was at Wisconsin, and also Wisconsin's in the Big Ten West, considered the best Big Ten West team. So that will hurt Michigan a little bit in the race for the Big Ten East division title, but it won't absolutely kill them. They can bounce back from that. But the biggest thing is you have to look at the remaining schedule for Michigan, is that we can forget all about this September loss on the road to a top 25 team in the nation, because Michigan has ample opportunity to make up for it. Now, they can't falter at all. They can't have another mistake. But they get Iowa at home. Iowa's the 14th ranked team. They're playing them October 5th. They go at Penn State. Penn State's a 12th ranked team. The week right after, they host Notre Dame, a top 10 team right now. Then 2 weeks later, they host Michigan State, rivalry game, one where Harbaugh definitely needs another win in that rivalry game to get his record over 500. They host them November 16th. 2 weeks after that, it's hosting Ohio State. You get Ohio State at home. And that's the game that, of course, I'm circling. That's the game that everybody knows it all comes down to. But this narrative that even if Harbaugh beats Ohio State this year, he's going to get fired is simply not the case. Or it's simply not the case if he's able to win out. That Michigan now, and Harbaugh in general, has zero room for error. That he's getting paid in the top 5 college football head coaches. And with that, you need to be considering that you should be a top 5 program, so you should be making the college football playoff. So if Harbaugh wants to keep his job, he has to, A, win out, because that would get them to the college football playoff. That they're not out of the race just yet. We've seen one-loss conference champions make it to the college football playoff, and you're telling me that the committee would hold out a Michigan team that, yeah, I know it was a bad loss, but if they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wins over right now who are currently ranked teams and plausibly could still stay ranked, over 5 ranked teams, including Ohio State, who we're assuming could be a top 5 team and possibly in the committee's top 4 by the time that game rolls around, you think they would leave Michigan out of that conversation? You think they would not include them just because of this one loss to Wisconsin? So this narrative that Jim Harbaugh, his time is done, is wrong. It's completely wrong. Now, he doesn't have any room for error, whereas you could have made the case that, okay, what if Ohio State has a loss maybe to Penn State this year, and that if Michigan lost to Ohio State but still was able to get the tiebreaker or something like that for the Big Ten East, something along those lines. I don't really know how it would have worked out, but if Michigan basically was able to lose to Ohio State but still make the college football playoff as a one-loss team, you could have made that argument. But now with this loss to Wisconsin, they can't lose another game, because even if they were to win out and then lose that Ohio State game, or even if they were to lose a couple of these next games and then beat Ohio State, I don't think Jim Harbaugh keeps his job. And it's at this point right now this season, Harbaugh, since he has never made the college football playoff or beaten Ohio State, he needs to do both this year to keep his job. It's not out of the question yet. But you look at Ohio State, a team that, yes, they're top 5 ranked, but we've always viewed it this Urban Meyer has this leg up over Jim Harbaugh. Well, Urban Meyer's not there anymore. And as such, Jim Harbaugh needs to finally do that one thing he hasn't been able to do, that one thing that's kept him from becoming a great head coach in Michigan history, that Ohio State win. So, no, I don't think Jim Harbaugh is going to get fired during this season. Not unless they lose several more games. I don't think Jim Harbaugh is going to lose. I don't think Michigan is out of the college football playoff race. Until they are out of the college football playoff race, then you can start talking about, okay, will Jim Harbaugh lose his job? That's completely understandable. If they lose 2 or 3 more games before they get to Ohio State, I think that is completely not reasonable, but almost expected that he would probably lose his job in season. But until they are clearly knocked out of that college football playoff with that second loss, I'm not going to call it done for Jim Harbaugh. He still has a shot, maybe not a very good one, maybe one that has such razor-thin margin of error, because even if he beats Ohio State, but what if Ohio State falls apart this year and that win doesn't look that impressive? Does that still save his job? Does that still get him into the college football playoff? I don't know. Or what if they go all the way? What if they win out, beat Ohio State, just to then lose again to Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship and then miss out on the college football playoff? Harbaugh's not keeping his job then. So I'm looking at this right now as you can't put the final nail in the coffin for Jim Harbaugh, but you can kind of start building the coffin, because it doesn't look very good and it doesn't look very likely that he's going to be able to keep his job. But it's not over yet. That'll wrap it up for this episode of the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, this podcast comes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so make sure to rate and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform. Also, if you want more archived episodes of this, or my episodes of my music discussion podcast, or my interview series, Anything Goes with Jackson Neill, go down to the link in the show notes, to jacksonneillpodcasts.com. There you'll find all the episodes to all of my podcasts, so make sure to check that out. Also, if you're a really big fan of the show, maybe consider becoming a subscriber over there on Patreon. There, you get access to really cool bonus content, including right here from the Sports Podcast, with a bonus segment each and every month. And you can sign up to become a subscriber for just a couple dollars a month, or even $1 a month. You also get access to cool bonus content from my music podcast and bonus questions from my interviews on Anything Goes. And sometimes those question and answers, those parts of the interviews, are sometimes the most fun because they get talking about random things. So If you want to head check that out, go down to the link in the description to check out the link to Patreon. I write, record, produce everything for these podcasts myself as a full-time college student, so any little bit of support just helps me spend more time making them. If you want to stay up to date on everything I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JacksonNeill20. Today's music is by Analog by Nature with their song CDK Sunday. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you all next time.